Good morning, church. Will you stand and worship with us? You know, recently I've really been reminded that even in our moments of apathy, when we come in and we're not really feeling it, when we're coming in from a super busy week, that the Lord is the lion who fights for us, that he loves us ferociously, and that he shows up for us every time, even when we don't bring that energy. So will you worship with us this morning as we praise the God who fights our battles? He's coming on the clouds, kings and kingdoms will bow down, and every chain will break as broken hearts declare his praise. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is a lion, the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains. Every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before him. So open up the gates, make way before the King of Kings. The God who comes to save is here to set the captives free. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is a lion, the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sin of the world. His blood breaks the chains. Every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before him. Will you sing this with us? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sin of the world. His blood breaks the chains. Every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before him. Amen. Church, will you celebrate that this morning? You know, sometimes I get in this place when we've sung a song before, or when we've sung it for a long time, where I kind of become like super apathetic to it and it kind of loses its meaning. And that song was kind of one for me that is so familiar that sometimes I forget the power that that song holds. That the Lord he's our lion. He fights for us and he loves us, but he's also the lamb. He's gentle and he's loving. and that he sacrificed his son for us. And as we've been going through this series, I've just been reflecting on just how much I'm craving rest and how much, this season has just been so busy, as I'm sure it has been for you. And I'm just looking for that rest, and I can't turn my mind off. And I've just been reminded that the Lord has ordered my steps, and that there's only so much that I can control. There's only so many things that I can do to get the result that I think I'm looking for. But ultimately, the Lord knows what's going to happen, and he's already put the steps in place for me to get there. And that he's just choosing to use me in his plan. And it makes it feel so much more simple because there's no way that I can mess it up. Because no matter what, his will is going to be accomplished. And in that simplicity, I find this place of authenticity, this genuine reflection of just standing in the presence of my Father, knowing that there's nothing I can do to earn his favor. And I'm not even really thinking about all the things that he's done for me to give me a reason to love him. I'm just thinking about who he is and how great his love for us before we ever spoke a word, before we were ever aware of who he was, that his love for us was so great. And that our desire, we're created to just desire him. So my prayer for you is that as we continue to sing, that just in this moment that you'll put aside the distractions and the things that are keeping your mind spinning, and that you'll just be present, that your desire will just be to stand in the presence of our Father and to just worship him. Will you worship with us this morning? Caught up in your presence, and I just want to sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment, and I never want to leave. Oh, I'm not here for blessings, and Jesus, you don't owe me anything, and more than anything that you can do, I just want you. I'm sorry when I've just gone through the motions. I'm sorry when I just sang another song. Take me back to where we started. I open up my heart to you. I'm sorry when I've come with my agenda. I'm sorry when I forgot that you're enough. Take me back to where we started. I open anything else. God, but center our desire on who you are. Nothing else, nothing else. Will you sing that again with us? I just want you and nothing else, nothing else, nothing else will do. I just want you and nothing else, nothing else, nothing else will do. I just want you and nothing else, nothing else, nothing else will do. I just want you and nothing else, nothing else, nothing else will do. I just want you and nothing else, and nothing else, nothing else will do. I just want you and nothing else, and nothing else, nothing else will do. I just want you and nothing else, nothing else, nothing else will do. I just want you and nothing else, nothing else, nothing else will do. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above, ye heavenly hosts.
was in my quiet time on Friday morning reading Psalm 103, and the verses 8 through 12 stuck out to me, so I decided to memorize it, meditate on it throughout the weekend. And I invite you to join with me now to do a little call and response. Psalm 103, 8 begins this way: "The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in love. He will not always accuse, nor will he harbor his anger forever. He does not treat us as our sins deserve, or repay us according to our transgressions. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us." Church, this is why we worship. This is why we sing. This is why we celebrate. We can clap about that. We can shout about that because God loves us that much. Would you pray with me right now? God, we thank you for that kind of abundant love that is immeasurable. I thank you that we can approach you and you are so compassionate and gracious with us. That you're not some angry God up there, but you are slow to anger and abounding in love. Thank you that you do not treat us as our sins deserve. That you don't see our sin as we see it. You see it as separated because of Jesus, as far as the east is from the west. We thank you for Jesus, who makes all of that possible, all of that true. Even though we may not feel that way, it's true. So I just pray, Lord, anybody in this room who's yet to experience your compassion and love, may they understand that right now. Calling each one of us to yourself. Thank you. Praise you. In Jesus' name, amen. You guys can have a seat. Thanks for doing that with me. If you're new, welcome. My name is Dave, and if you have not filled out a connection card, we would love for you to do so. That helps us get connected with you, and we'll send you just one email as a way to get better connected with us. And so you can fill that either online or in the seat pockets in front of you. There's a card. Fill that out and take those to Grace Central afterwards, and we have a gift waiting for you there. If you weren't here last week, we started a brand new series we're calling The Freedom of Simplicity, where we really believe, as Jesus taught over and over again, that less is actually greater than more. Our working definition for the series, we looked at something Richard Foster said in his book. He said this: simplicity is the inward reality of single-hearted focus upon God and his kingdom. And last week, we talked about seeking God's kingdom first and how it starts there. If we're ever going to simplify our life, that's where it begins, which results in an outward lifestyle of modesty, openness, and unpretentiousness, and which disciplines our hunger for status, glamour, and luxury. In other words, as we begin to move outward in our seeking after God's kingdom, we begin to simplify our lives and what we buy and what we just what we dress like and our luxuries and all those kind of things. It begins to affect all of those areas. And so this morning, I'm going to talk about this idea of the simplicity of stuff. Simplicity of stuff. And in order for us to really dive in and understand just how it's everywhere. Stuff is everywhere. We're going to talk about this idea of the propaganda of stuff to begin with, and how it's the air we breathe today in our American culture. Now, to understand the propaganda of stuff, we have to first understand this one key figure in American history, in modern history, that has probably impacted our view of stuff more than anybody else. Has anybody ever heard of this man right here, Edward Bernays? Anybody? No? Okay. So Edward Bernays, I would put up there as influencing our American culture just as much as maybe a Henry Ford or a Bell, or just any of those inventors that have just made an impact. Edward Bernays has made an impact, and we don't even know who he is. So let me just tell you a little bit about Edward Bernays to understand how we got to where we're at in our American culture. Edward Bernays has a more famous uncle, and many of you probably know who that is, Sigmund Freud. Right? So Sigmund Freud wrote a book, and he's famous for trying to explain the human condition this way, that we have these dangerous, unconscious desires in all of us that need to be controlled. And so he wrote this book about it, and Edward picked it up. Edward was living in America, and Edward picked it up and read his uncle's work. And he became enamored with this idea of these unconscious desires that we all have. And he began to show American corporations how, for the very first time, you can get people to want to buy things even though they don't need them. And so up until the First World War, people didn't think that way. But Edward Bernays put a link between our stuff and our desires in a way that had never happened before. Now, one just incredible series of videos that would help explain all this, and if you're just interested in this area, is what's called the Century of the Self. It's actually on YouTube for free. There's like 4 or 5 episodes. It's phenomenal as far as just the history. I would encourage you, if you have teenagers, to pay your teenager 10, 15, 20 bucks to watch this series. It is worth the time to watch it. There is a little bit of language, 4th and 5th episodes, because they get into psychology, and some of these sessions people begin swearing. But other than that, it's a really interesting just understanding of how we got here in our culture. But again, as up to World War I, the majority of purchases that people would make were based on things like durability, function, usefulness, need. Up until World War I, that's what people thought of when they thought of buying something. But things shifted. After World War I, the production in America went up really, really high during the war. And so in order to keep production going, what do you need? You need people to buy those products, right? Paul Mazur, who was a partner with Edward Bernays, he worked at Lehman Brothers, he was a banker. Here's what he said that must happen, this shift that has to happen. He says, we must shift. So this is like just after World War I. He says, we must shift America from a needs to a desires culture. People must be trained to desire, to want new things, even before the old had been entirely consumed. We must shape a new mentality in America. Man's desires must be overshadowed by his needs, must overshadow his needs. And so enter Edward Bernays in this discussion and trying to figure out how do we do that. Edward Bernays, again, he understood this idea of a subconscious desires that we all have. And so he helped Woodrow Wilson in the First World War with propaganda. And then after that, he had this really famous quote. He says, if you can use propaganda for war, you can certainly use it for peace. And so after World War I, he decided we're not going to use the word propaganda, or maybe this is after World War II, but he changed the word propaganda to public relations. So if you ever heard public relations, Edward Bernays said that's just another name for propaganda. Okay? So he started using his uncle's ideas. And one example in this is that after World War I, that was the height of women's suffrage movement just before they got allowed to vote. Can you imagine that? Women weren't allowed to vote until 1920, whatever. And so up until that, there was a height of the women's suffrage movement. But during that time also, the cigarette companies came to Edward Bernays and said, we want you to help us get women to smoke because women aren't smoking. Only men are smoking. Only men are buying our cigarettes. And in that culture, women, it was seen as not very ladylike to smoke a cigarette. So Edward, help us do that. Help us to get women to start smoking. So Edward came up with his idea that during one of the marches for women's suffrage, he paid these young, attractive women to make their way up into the front of the line just in time for all the cameras to be there. And at that moment, they reached into their pockets, grabbed a cigarette, and started smoking these cigarettes. And they called these cigarettes, they're not cigarettes, they called them torches of freedom. And so in other words, he began to link smoking with freedom, smoking with the women's suffrage movement. And so if you were for the women's suffrage movement, you should be for smoking. And if you're against smoking, well, that means you are against women voting and having rights. Do you see how genius and disturbing this is all at the same time? And so from then on, the pattern of women smoking, the numbers began to rise astronomically. In fact, in the movies, women who were seen as strong, powerful, confident, and free were lighting up the cigarettes as a symbol of all that. And this is just how, just crazy this is. It's completely irrational. Smoking doesn't make you more powerful. Smoking doesn't make you more free. Smoking doesn't liberate you at all. And yet, somehow, Edward was able to convince American culture, the people in America, that somehow smoking was the symbol for all of that. And so advertising moved from the head, logic, to the heart, emotion. American journalist Leonard Dove described it this way in 1929. He says, "The problem before us today is not how to produce the goods, but how to produce the customers. Consumptionism is the science of compelling men to use more and more things. Consumptionism is bringing it about that the American citizen's first importance to his country is no longer that of citizen, but that of consumer." Right? And so their goal was to create a new type of consumer, one that would not buy things based on what they needed, but based on what they wanted. And even beyond that, they began to buy things based on their wanting to express themselves. And there's videos of this going on. Did I talk about Century of the Self yet? Okay, so in the Century of the Self, So in the Century of the Self, they have this interview, this woman who's like, "Why did you buy this outfit?" It's because I wanted to express myself differently. I wanted to show people, and this is like back in the 30s kind of idea. And so this idea is just permeating our culture, that your stuff is somehow tied to who you are. And so by the mid-50s, Victor Lebo wrote this very famous now, it's a little bit a longer quote, but he wrote this. He says, "Our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfactions, our ego satisfactions in consumption. The measure of social status, of social acceptance, of prestige is now to be found in our consumptive patterns." Again, we value ourselves, we place ourselves in the status of our culture about as far as how much we can buy and what we have. He says the very meaning and significance of our lives today expressed in consumptive term. He says we need things consumed, burned up, worn out, replaced, and discarded at an ever-increasing pace. You notice how your stuff doesn't last as long as it used to? Well, this has been going on for a long time now. This is back in the 50s. This began to get going. He says, we need to have people eat, drink, dress, ride, live with ever more complicated, not simple, right? Our goal is to get simple. They're trying to make things more complicated and therefore constantly more expensive consumption. Your phones are getting what? More expensive. And you know what's really changing? Not that much anymore, is it? Right? A better camera, a faster processor, but we're going to charge you a whole lot more. It's just getting more and more expensive. He says, what becomes clear is that from the larger viewpoint of our economy, the total effect of all the advertising and promotion and selling is to create and maintain the multiplicity, again, complication and intensity of wants that are the spur to the standard of living in the United States. So it's to get you to buy stuff more and more and more and more. So here's some troubling stats of where we're at today in our culture, as if we need to know, but I'm going to share it with anyways. Americans spend $1.2 trillion annually on non-essential goods. We spend this much money on stuff we don't ever need. It's just, Americans have a credit card debt now, and I had to change this number recently. This was just under $1 trillion. Now it's over $1 trillion in the last couple months. $1 trillion in credit card debt. That equates to the average, credit card debt holder is about $7,279 back in December each of credit card debt. We are spending ourselves into oblivion, right? The average American family spends $1,700 on clothes annually. The average American woman, not to pick on ladies, but this is just a stat I found, owns 30 outfits, one for every day of the month. And the reason I share that is because in 1930, that figure was 9 articles of clothing or outfits. The average American throws away 65 pounds of clothing per year. Last stats here. The average size of the American home has nearly tripled in size over the last 50 years, which is interesting because our family size is getting bigger or smaller? Smaller, and yet our homes are tripling in size over the last 50 years. We don't need the space, we just want the space, right? The average American home, and I love this, has over 300,000 items in it. 300,000. And I was thinking about that and looking at I'm like, yeah, I can see that in our house. It's like, boom, kitchen, and just 300,000 items. And over the course of our lifetime, we will spend a total of 3,680 hours or 153 days searching for misplaced items. Where are my keys? I can't find my keys, And so this is just how we are spending our money and our time. It's troubling, right? And so I encourage you, go watch The Century of the Self. I'll share one really, really quick story in it that just blew my mind. This is later on, like in the 60s, but they introduced the idea of psychology into buying. And psychology used to use focus groups to figure things out. And so they took focus groups into advertising. And by the way, I am not against advertising. If you are an advertiser in marketing, we need goods and services, right? I'm not trying to pick on advertisement today. We need those goods and services. If you believe in what you're selling, great. I'm just trying to caution us. Sometimes maybe we do an oversell of what the product actually will provide. But in this video, they do focus groups. And one of the things they did was Betty Crocker came out with this idea of if you just add water to brownies, you can make brownies in like a real quick thing. And so they put those on the shelves, but no woman was buying, no wives, no mothers were buying this product. And so they did a focus group and asked the women, why aren't you buying this product? We've made it so simple. You just add water and now you can make brownies. And you know what their answer was? We feel guilty that we aren't doing more in the kitchen, that we aren't baking, that this is not baking. We feel guilty about that. And there's desire of we want to help out, that this longing, that we want to be supportive, and we just feel guilty. This is too easy. And so you know what Betty Crocker did? It's genius. You add an egg. And that's it. And once they added an egg and maybe some oil, right, it was off the shelves. This is just how they play with our mind. They just know what's going on. Anyways, that's just a side extra, whatever. But I thought that was so fascinating. So next time you go buy Betty Crocker, you're adding an egg to relieve the guilt, apparently, that we would all feel by not adding that egg. But let's get into the promise and the problem of stuff. The promise and the problem of stuff. A great book I recommend, and an awesome author, writer, speaker, Andy Crouch, has done a lot of work on power and other things. But he wrote this book called The Life We're Looking For, Reclaiming Relationship in a Technological World. Because a lot of our stuff today is just tech, right? A lot of the stuff we buy is smart things, and there's a lot of technology to it. And in his book and on podcasts, he talks about this idea of the innovation bargain of technology. That when you buy something and your stuff, there's this promise that comes with it. And the promise that comes with any sort of new technology are two things. One is now you will be able to do something that you could not before, right? And you will no longer have to do something that you did before. That's the promise. That's what advertisers want you to understand when you buy something new. Look, you will be able to do this and be able to take pictures of this and, in low light this time, and even lower light, right, that you can do, and you'll no longer have to worry about whatever. But he says, oftentimes, there's a trade-off when you buy something new, some new sort of technology. And the trade-off is this, that you will no longer be able to that you did before. And you will have to do something that you didn't before. So let's think about this as an example. Think about electric cars. And again, I'm not picking on electric cars. Electric cars are great. I know some of you own electric cars. But I want you to think about, help me out, what's the promise? Now you will be able to what with an electric car? What will you be able to do? Save money, right? You'll be able to save money. Some of you maybe have felt like a little bit of guilt of using gas power, and making more carbon. Now you will be able to have less guilt about your carbon footprint. And you will no longer have to what? Pay for gasoline. Who likes to pay for gasoline? Nobody likes to pay for gasoline. And the promise is you will never have to pay for gasoline again. Doesn't that sound awesome? Yeah. But there's a trade-off. What's the trade-off? You will no longer be able to do what? Drive cross-country like you did before, right? I think the Ford CEO just got on about the electric trucks, and he's like, I didn't realize how inconvenient this has been trying to drive cross-country with my electric Ford truck. It's totally harder than I ever thought. And you'll have to do what that you didn't before? Charge and sometimes wait 45 minutes to an hour to 2 hours to charge. If you ever had to do that, you know how frustrating that is. They don't advertise that when they're selling the electric car, but that's the bargain. That's the trade-off. And it's not just technology, right? Just think about other stuff. Think about a dog, for example. Now you will be able to what? Right? Now you'll be able to watch your kid play with a puppy, and how you've always wanted to see that moment where your child will just embrace that puppy, and how sweet and cuddly, and it's going to be awesome, and how you'll be able to have that moment with them. And so, yes, right? And you'll no longer have to what? You will no longer have to hear your child ask, can I get a what? Puppy. It's like, here's your puppy, now stop asking me. I'll never have to hear them ask for a puppy again. But we know the trade-off. You will no longer be able to do what? Anything. I love dogs, right? But right, you don't get to sell that part to it, and you'll have to do what? You'll have to pick up the poop. That's what the first answer last hour. It was like, you will have to bend over, and it's like, who's the master here in this whole scenario? But that's the trade-off that always comes. And more often, what he argues is that we lose like our personhood, we lose our freedoms with every step of advancement of technology. And the more and more stuff I have, actually I lose some of my personhood. I lose actually community, because now I'm not so dependent or interdependent on our community for things. Now it's just a whole bargain of swapping. So he says, well, why do we end up doing that? If we understand like there's a trade-off, why do we make this trade-off? And he refers to what he calls the dream of magic. The dream of magic. And he points us back to the very beginning in the garden where Eve is told a lie. And this lie is that if you eat of this fruit, you will not die, and you will become like who? Like God. Well, if you understand the story, God created Adam and Eve in his own image already. They were made in his likeness already. But here, Satan is offering what he would call the first piece of technology in history. This simple thing, if you just take a bite out of it, you will become like God. And now, Adam and Eve, would they have become more like God as they walked with him? Right? They would have, I'm sure. There would have been a whole process. There would have been probably challenges and growth along the way. But here's an easy button. Here's an easy way to just pass all that up and just, here, take it. You will become like God. It's magic. And that's the promise of stuff. That here's this magical device, here's this magical piece of technology that you don't have to change, but it can change something. And it won't cost you anything. That's like the promise, but it's not true. And Andy connects the theme of this idea of magic to idols and idolatry. And if you've ever studied the Old Testament, idolatry is an interesting thing. And at some point somebody creates this statue, and they know the statue isn't God, and yet somehow they begin to believe that I've created this statue, and somehow when I created it, and maybe when I spoke to it, it rained like it didn't before. Or my wife got pregnant, and so there was somehow this magic that happened. And so people weren't stupid back in the day, but they began to put this connection. Like, if I do this, then this happens. Well, what idols do is at the beginning of idolatry, they offer you so much, and yet they demand very little. But over a course of time, idols offer you less and less and less. It's not going to rain as much. Your wife won't get as pregnant as much. And yet they demand more and more of yourself. Until eventually, what do idols ultimately ask of each and every one of us? To sacrifice what? Not your own life. If you read the Old Testament, the actual ultimate sacrifice an idol will ask of you or demand of you is your child's life. And what has happened, he makes this connection here, that this desire for more and more stuff, we are not only sacrificing our own lives to get it, we are sacrificing our own children to get it. Right? Because we have to pay for all this stuff. So that means I'm in more time in the office, more time away, and it's less time with our kids. And really, is what they really need is you, not what you can provide in the sense of another whatever. Right? So he's like, you have to understand there's a trade-off, and there's this magical idea of the stuff that promises security and all these things, and it doesn't actually happen. So Robert Wuthnow, one last quote before we get in our scripture this morning. Robert Wuthnow wrote God and Mammon in America. Here's what he says. He says, we live in a materialistic culture and we want money and possessions, and very few people have heard a powerful voice telling them to resist those impulses or how to resist those impulses. Cue Jesus. Enter Jesus in the preaching of stuff. You want to hear a powerful voice against all this propaganda of stuff, the promises of stuff? Let's look at what Jesus had to say about stuff. If you have your Bibles, we're going to look at the preaching of stuff this morning from Jesus. It's going to be found in Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 13. Last week we were in chapter 12, but we actually skipped ahead. We looked at, again, the idea of seeking God's kingdom first, and now we're going to rewind the tape and look at what Jesus said in the same conversation about our stuff. So here's how it begins. He says this, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now, why does this person come to Jesus is the question. In that culture, if you had a dispute between, your brothers and, states and all those kind of things, you did not go to the court systems. They had no court systems set up for that. You would go to a rabbi. And Jesus was a rabbi. But why did this man choose Jesus to ask this question, or to tell this guy, tell my brother to share? Why did he go to Jesus, the rabbi, instead of some other rabbi? It's because Jesus, one, talked a lot about money. We know that. 11 of his 39 parables was all about money and stuff. And not only did Jesus talk a lot about money, but he also talked a lot about what to do with your money. And what did Jesus tell people to do with their money? Not a trick question. Hoard it? Give it away, share it, right? I mean, that's what Jesus talked about doing a lot. And so if you wanted your brother to share with you, you would go to Jesus, who talks a lot about money. He didn't have a problem with that, and talked a lot about sharing your money, right? And so it's of course, I'm going to ask Jesus to step in and get in the middle of all this. But Jesus replied this. He says, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? Why are you trying to throw me in the middle of all this?" And then he said to them, and I want you to underline that them. We are told in Luke that Jesus specifically is talking to his disciples, not the crowds. And the reason is because Jesus is talking to his followers and not everybody else. He's not expecting everybody else to follow this, but as his disciples are going to treat money and possessions differently as they follow Jesus. And so he says to them, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Well, why, Jesus? Because life does not consist in abundance of possessions. Can you just read that last part with me? Life does not consist in abundance of possessions. Jesus isn't anti-possessions. What Jesus is doing is he's saying, watch out, because the promise is that stuff will bring you the good life, the full life, the happy life, the contentment life. And that's just not true. Watch out. And then Jesus tells one of his 11 of the 39 parables about money and stuff. Here's what he says next. He says, here's a parable to think about. He says, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. Notice the fact that he points out that the ground is what gives this man the abundance. as if this was not the rich man himself doing this. This was the ground. In other words, the gift of God. This was God's gift to this man. Or you can think about it, this was the work of the workers. This was the effects of the workers on the ground. But it was not from the rich man. This was not really because of him. Something else was a gift to him, right? It was given to him. It was worked for him, but it was not this rich man's stuff himself. But the rich man didn't think of it that way. And so he thought to himself, what shall I do? Notice the I's and the my's. What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Right? Notice the personal, like this is mine. This is all about me. Notice this is hashtag first world problem, right? What do I do with all of our stuff? Honey, like our basement is full. Our closets are full. Our garage, we can't even park our cars in the garage. Because I thought last time I checked, garages were houses for cars, which is a crazy idea in itself. We have that much whatever. But now we're taking our cars out and adding just more stuff into our garages. And you know what? That's not enough. We have to go buy or rent a what? A storage unit or two to fill all of our stuff. Honey, what are we doing with all of our stuff here? And he says, what shall I do? And what's the answer? Every person who's outside looking in to this rich man who has so much abundance, what's the answer? What? Give some of it away. And it's so easy to point at other people on that one, right? The rich people, we're not rich. The other person's rich, and they should be giving some of that away, right? You can just probably see the people in the crowds thinking about all this. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Think about the waste in that, right? But this is what we do. We have, our kids, we send off and whatever, and what do? We go buy a bigger house. Why? I don't know. Because we can. Like this is just what we do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there, he says, I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, because notice, he has no one to talk to. No family, no friends. I mean, this poor guy, like he's got all this stuff. And now, who am I going to talk to about this? I'll say to myself, self, well done. Well done. You have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. And right here, you see the promise of stuff again. What is this guy believing about stuff? Help me out. Stuff will provide what? Security. I heard that. What else? Happiness. I'll be merry. What else? Will he have to keep working? No. He can retire. Isn't that the dream of every person? Retire. I can't wait till I can retire and do what? I don't know, right? But I'll retire. And I'll just sit and I'll eat and drink and I'll be merry if I just get enough stuff. But God in this moment steps into the story. And he says, you what? You fool. Ouch. God does not call a lot of people fools in the Bible. So this is kind of heavy. But a fool is someone who is missing the connections between themselves and reality. Like they don't see the dots. They don't understand how the dots are connected. They don't understand how the world really works. They are living in some sort of fantasy realm. They don't understand all of that. And he says, you fool, you don't understand. He says, this very night, your life will be demanded from you. Then you will get what you have prepared. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? And what's the answer to that last question? What's the answer? Who's going to get all this stuff? Who knows? Who knows? It's not going to be him. It's going to be gone. It's going to be given to somebody. We don't know. It's out of your hands. Because you thought you had control of it. You thought it was going to bring you security. You thought it was going to bring you happiness. It's not going to do any of those things. You fool, you don't realize the empty promises of stuff. He says, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. So what is Jesus' point here in all this? The point is simple. The good life, the full life, again, is not found in possessions and not found in your stuff. Life does not consist in abundance of possessions. If you don't hear anything else this morning, hear that. Life does not consist. Life cannot be found in more and more. Nothing. Now, why does Jesus go here and why does he spend so much time on money? It's not because, again, he's anti-stuff or anti-possessions. He understands the connection between our stuff and our hearts. And nothing competes for our hearts more than our stuff. And so Jesus is constantly just warning his disciples, warning his followers, like you may not understand the connection here. Let me help you make this connection between stuff and your heart. It is dangerous. It is dangerous. And again, it wasn't because he was going after their money. He didn't want their money. He wanted their hearts. And so Jesus would talk about money and possessions so much, right? We all know this one. It is better, more blessed to what? Give than to receive. You're going to be happier giving stuff away than you are getting stuff. And we all go, yep, I know that intellectually, but man, are we so afraid to actually try to live that out. Jesus would go on and say, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other, but you cannot serve both God and money. It's impossible to serve both, but there's this gravitational pull towards stuff and money and what it offers us, and it competes for our hearts like nothing else. Jesus said it this too. He said, truly, I tell you, it is hard for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. It's not impossible for rich. He's not picking on rich people. But he's saying it is hard. Wealth is an obstacle to the kingdom of God, to a full and rich and happy life, not the means to a full and rich and happy life. He's warning us of this. Again, I tell you, it's easier, he says, for a camel to go through an eye of the needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. It is not the means. It is an obstacle to the good life, to the happy life, to a rich life. Now, there's a whole lot more to be said, and I will talk about wealth next week, so please come back. Hopefully I didn't scare all of you away, but come back next week. We're going to talk more about it. But Jesus doesn't command us to sell everything or live off of one tunic and one pair of sandals, right? I mean, he doesn't do that. But he's saying there's more to life than this life. Do you see that? Church, do you see that? Centerville, Springboro, Kettering, some of the affluent areas, Waynesville. Come on, do you see that? We're trying to compete with everybody around us and who has the bigger car and the better house and the newer boat, and it's not there. It's just not there. And our kids are in high school now, right? My kid's caring about what his shoes are nowadays. And it's like, oh, he's afraid to get made fun of. And I get those tensions and feelings, but somehow we have to tell our kids it's not there. Life is not found in the abundance of stuff or Air Jordans or what have you. In fact, the more stuff we have, the more anxious we often get, the less peace we have. Randy Alcorn wrote a great book on possessions and wealth. You can look that up. But he says every increased possession adds increased anxiety to our lives. You buy that, it's just another thing to worry about, another thing to distract you, another thing that you have to deal with. But the less stuff we own, and the more time we have, the more freedom we have. I love what John Mark Comer says about simplicity. He said this. He says, it's limiting the number of our possessions, expenses, activities, and social obligations to a level where we are free to live joyfully in the kingdom with Jesus. If we really want freedom, if we really want joy, if we really want peace and contentment, it is not found with more stuff, better stuff, newer stuff. And there are so many benefits of owning less. Think about it. How many of us would love to be more generous? I would be. Well, how do we do that? Buy less stuff. That's a novel idea, right? We want more joy. We want more contentment. It's owning less will bring that, right? And it's not even about owning less. Ultimately, it comes down to the heart issue of wanting less stuff. It's about seeking God's kingdom first, wanting more of Him, and there's more of Him. That means less stuff that I really think I need and want because I have more of Him in my life. Joshua Becker is one of the leading voices in the Christian world about less stuff. He's a minimalist. He was a Christian pastor. He gave up being a pastor, but he's still a Christian. But he writes a blog, becomingminimalist.com. I'd recommend checking out. He wrote a few books as well. But, and I'm not encouraging people to all become minimalist. I'm just encouraging you to think about some things that he has thought about thoughtfully, and I want to share those with you. But here's what he says. He says, 3 questions to ask when it comes to getting rid of some stuff. And where do we start with that? He says, well, first of all, what do I want to accomplish with my life? That's a great question. Some of us would like to have to spend maybe a whole year thinking about that question alone. What do I really want to accomplish with my life? Where do I see my life going? Second question, what do I need to do to accomplish? What do I need to accomplish those things? What stuff does that first goal require of me? What do I really need? And then the things that I don't need, well, what are the things that are keeping me from becoming and doing what God wants me? I was like, is that really helping me, or is that just a distraction in my life? Is that just sucking up my time and my attention and my relational, energies that I could be putting towards something else? So here's what he suggests, and I kind of reframed some of this in my own words, but here's some things to think about. 1, getting started. If you go into your house after this, right, what do we start? 1, start with the why in mind. Why am I doing this? And I hope it wasn't because, Pastor Dave told me to or whatever. I hope you start with the why of understanding I want more of God in my life. And for me to do that, I need some space. I need to create some space, some margin. And I know stuff can be such an obstacle to all that. So start with the why in mind. 2, start with the easiest room of your house. Don't go to the basement. Right? Start small, living room, maybe a bedroom, maybe even just your car. Start there. Do I really need an extra spark plug that I never use sitting in my, whatever it is, do you really need that or not? And then, please, so we don't have, splitting families here next week, start with your stuff first, okay? I know this has probably already been a tension in some of your marriages. What I don't need you to go home and say, see, honey, I told you so. I told you should take that, stack of clothes you never wear. Start here and live here, okay? We're not trying to get rid of other people's stuff. We're just trying to look at your stuff, okay? Start first with you. So, to end this morning, I wanted to bring up a professional, because I am not a professional. We have a resident professional organizer and dealer with stuff, all things stuff, Lori Fursden. Welcome Lori to the stage here as I get our chairs here. Lori's been a friend for a long time, a friend of Grace for a long time. I had her oldest, Michelle, in the youth group when I was a youth pastor. I know her other kids attended Awana. Some of you helped teach them the Bible, and it's just awesome to be able to have somebody in our church who is an expert in these areas.
Thank you for inviting me today, Dave. Your sermon was amazing.
Oh, thanks.
Just spot on. A lot of people in this audience, I'm sure, need to hear that.
Yeah. Just keep it coming. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. No.
And then when you said...
You actually wrote a book called Lose Your Stuff, Find Yourself, and I think you're going to give this one away if anybody wants it afterwards, so you can fight over that. But I just had a few questions just to ask you, because you deal with this on a daily basis, and as just a professional organizer. So as a professional organizer, you get a really interesting perspective when it comes to stuff and people's attachment. Why do you think people have such a hard time letting go of their stuff?
Well, a lot of people, there's a lot of reasons, and I'm going to list some here. But a lot of people have tapes playing in their head that were put there by a parent, a grandparent, great-grandparents. Think of if your grandmother or great-grandmother grew up in the Depression, They're going to have a tape. You're going to get a tape that says, keep things, save things. You just never know when you might need those things. I believe that you can be taught to be sentimental.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. If you were my son, I could say, if I die tomorrow, make sure this ring goes to my firstborn granddaughter, and tell her my story, and make sure she knows how your dad and I met, and she should wear it for her wedding ring, whether it's her wedding ring or just on her wedding, like make sure it's very important. Or you could have a mother that says, hey, if I pass away tomorrow, there's a pawn shop down the street. I want you to have a new car.
Yeah.
So I want you to take the money, get a new car. That was really important to me, that you drive a much more safer car. So please get rid of the ring.
Two really different narratives there.
Very
Yeah.
different narratives. So you can see you have different tapes playing. Every one of you have been given tapes that you play over and over and over in your head. So that's one reason why people have a hard time letting things go, because you've taken on someone else's belief about things. Fear, I might need it someday. I worked with someone the other day. She was my phone coaching client, and I think she said fear 9 times in an hour. I'm afraid to get rid of this. I'm afraid to do that. And at the end of the session, I had counted how many times, and I told her, did you know fear plays such a big part in how you're living your life right now? And she had no idea.
Yeah.
No idea.
Can I ask you
Yeah,
about
of course.
the fear of, this is what I was when I was starting to do this, like, what if I'm going to need this in a week or two, right? That narrative of like, if I throw it away, then I'm going to need it the next week. Like,
Yes.
How do you get over that?
So I always tell people, if you're going to have that fear, then you're going to have to keep everything, right? Because you might make a mistake. So you got to keep the 1,000 things that you probably don't need in your life, and just go ahead and keep them. Okay. But you also might keep it and for 30 years and then not need it. So I'm afraid that I might need it, but really you might not. So you're going to have some regrets when you let go of some things. There will be some things you let go of, but there's usually an easy way to get them back again.
Sure. Yeah,
So to let go of some of that fear. Our society, as you said throughout your whole sermon, gives us this message that things should be important. If you have a bigger house than I do, if you have a boat, if you have 2 cars instead of the 1 car that you need, you must be very successful and you must be very happy. So that's the message that we're getting from our society, that we need more to be happy, which was throughout your whole sermon today. Some people are just never taught how to get organized. I don't know if any of you have ever taken an organizing class in school. It's just not taught. We're thrown into homes, managing homes and offices and jobs and paperwork, and you've never been taught to manage those things. So it's hard for you to let go because you don't know what you're going to need and those things. Depression can enter the picture. Grief, so loss of a loved one, will throw people into a spiral of not being able to let go, maybe not be able to downsize their house because they can't let go of the loved one's things. And for some people, they have ADHD, which a lot of my clients do, so they don't have focus. Their brain doesn't categorize very well, which makes it hard for them to let go. So probably all of you are struggling with one or few of those things, and if you're struggling to let go of things.
Well, we know how, you deal with a lot of disorganized people and things, and you know how it can affect relationships. How have you seen this play out in the lives of your clients as far as the relational side of stuff?
Yeah, I see it a lot. If I work with more than one person in a home, there's going to be some conflict there. And you think about it, when you get married, one person may have a few things and someone comes on board with a lot of things. There's going to be some instant conflict there. But you have to remember your spouse may have been given that message of, take the ring, it's so important, it's precious.
That's the Lord of the
Where
Rings.
the spouse was, their mother said, chuck the ring, do this with the money. So you're coming from 2 different places, and that's why you don't want to be judgmental towards someone who has a hard time letting go. There's a reason why they can't let go. They have been taught to be sentimental, or the other 6 reasons that I gave you. So you want to be very compassionate towards them, and very patient when working with someone who's having a hard time letting go.
Yeah, how do you coach people to let go then? Like, what do you have a philosophy or steps, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is I need to find out about you. So if I was going to work with you, I don't start with your stuff at all. I find out who you are, where you want to be, what you want to do, and what's important to you. And then I have to show you how keeping these extra things are not really in line with what you just told me. So if you want to spend more time with a grandchild, if you want to go on vacation, if you want to learn how to play the guitar, if you want to do these things, then you might not need the bowling ball that was so precious to you that, during your bowling league. that you'll never use again. So it's my job to just not make you get rid of your things, but to help you understand why you're holding on to things that you don't need.
So you are so generous with your time, not just this morning, but you've offered to do a workshop for us for free. So it's September 12th from 6 to 8. It's going to be here, and so we invite anybody to come. But what do some people need to know about that night?
Well, first of all, we're going to have some fun. It's some audience participation, and you're going to be able to laugh at yourself and laugh with each other. So it's not some uptight, going to make you be a minimalist by any means. As I said earlier, I can't make you get rid of your things. The first part of my presentation is very motivational, inspirational, and understanding some of the things that we've talked about and you talked about in your sermon. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into those things. The second part will be more educational. So if you've never been taught how to organize, it's a learned skill that I can teach you. So you'll get some understanding there. And for those of you who have maybe felt some shame around holding on to so many things, I'm going to offer you hope during that seminar that you will be able to start taking control and get your life back.
Great. Well, I know Lori will be here after the service if you have any more questions, but I really want to encourage you, if you're interested at all, come to this workshop. It'll be really, really good. I know you've impacted my wife over the years, and she has really gleaned a lot from your information and challenges. So, thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. And I just shared the picture up there with the pancake. It does show you that just because something is good doesn't mean it's good in abundance. No one should eat a pancake that big. And no, I did not eat a whole pancake. I wanted to, but I knew that in abundance it would not be good for me. So.
Is that the blueberry muffin?
It's a blueberry cafe.
Blueberry cafe, yeah.
Now I'm hungry.
Now I know, right? One last little tip that I give you. What I've helped me is I'm trying to do more of a Sabbathing once a week and just taking a break from not just work, but taking a break from consumerism. So on the day that I Sabbath, I really try as much as I can not to go buy or shop for anything. And that exercises that little muscle inside that is probably pretty weak right now because just, the air we breathe, but the non-consumeristic side of you, just like, I don't need that thing today. I don't need to go buy that thing today. I don't need to be shopping for something today. And just hold off just one day, and that exercises that little muscle. And maybe you don't need that for the next day. And so it just helps us realize what we really need versus what we just want in the moment, just to fill that void of whatever we're trying to fill. So thanks to Lori. Let me just give you a couple of quick announcements before we wrap up. Safety team is something that we have here at church. We have some incredible men right now on that team. We do need to fill some more slots. If you are interested, man or woman, to jump in. Our church in our area is very, very safe, but we just want to make sure it's kept that way, and we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence for the youngest, especially in our church. So if you're interested, join the safety team, contact the church, centervillegrace.org/serve. You can sign up there or find me afterwards. Love to have you on there. Neighborhood Night Out is coming up. That's our big block party. Serve for one, we ask, and play for two. If you have not signed up yet, Grace Central, there's a sign-up sheet. We need some extra hands after the event is over. So if you're not a party person, that's fine. Come afterwards and help pick up, clean up. And we have some need for some extra hands with the kayaks. And that's Randy Sheaf's department. So if you know Randy, he does an amazing job with the kayaks down at the pond. And finally, Circle Up is what we're calling everyone to do right now. Life groups are beginning to start. If you have not joined a life group, please consider doing so. You can go to centervillegrace.org/groups to find out and get some more information that way. Hope you really enjoyed the end of our talk together with Lori and just the whole topic. Come back next week. We'll have some more great content and hopefully some helpful things to live a simple life so that you can be more and more free and experience the full life that Jesus had. So have a great rest of your Sunday. We'll see you back here for part 3 next week. Take care.